Hello and welcome everyone to the Pascal Dennis Music Podcast. I'm here with Pascal Dennis and David Logan, and similarly to last week, we are going to be talking about some epic songs, two epic songs. And the two songs we wanted to talk about are the epic Summer Side and the epic Crazy Angels. And I'm going to give it over to you, Pascal, because you can explain to us what the psychology and what the background to these songs is.
Thanks, Levi, and it's good to spend time with you and David every week. It's a special moment for me, reliving, the process that David and I went through, and the Crazy Angels band went through. These two songs are an expression of my family's history, and one of my motivations in writing songs is to express the 100 years plus of history my family has in North America and also in Eastern Europe. And they're both expressions of an ancient story. The latest incarnation, maybe, is The Great Gatsby, the famous novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's about a poor boy that is destitute, is isolated, and aspires to the mansion on the hill, the beautiful girl that lives there, and everything that represents. And things don't work out the way he expects. And um, the songs follow a similar trajectory, but they end in different places. And they're very close to me. They're epic in the sense that they're like novels. I feel them like novels, and they're in three parts. Maybe I'll start with Crazy Angels. So I grew up in the East End of Toronto, a very rough ethnic neighborhood, and our defining image was the Prince Edward Viaduct. It's a very beautiful bridge. It's kind of like our version of the Brooklyn Bridge. It was built during the Depression by, immigrants largely from Eastern Europe, all the craftsmen, the masons, and they poured everything into it and created this thing of beauty. So that's called the bridge our fathers and their fathers built. And on the other side of the bridge, there is the poshest neighborhood in Canada. It's called Rosedale.
Rosedale Valley. Rosedale Valley. Yeah.
Rosedale Valley. I used to look across that bridge and imagine the kind of lives people lived there. The prime ministers lived there, and um, industrial titans and robber barons and politicos. And I always aspired to it. I didn't realize and that I could never fit there. So that's what the song is about. Just the opening lyric just reflects it. So, like a tattered flag, a defiant flag, blood red sundown rays are spilt over heartbreak alleys and the glistening valley and the bridge our fathers and their fathers built. Then the chorus reflects the people I grew up with. Crazy angels and ragged saints haunt these rooftops and fire escapes. The cathedral is empty and the sisters are gone. There's a darkness where a light once shone. So there's that terrible sense of loss. And then it introduces the characters. Annabella was wild and a banker's daughter. Cigarettes and lace, four roses, which is a top end bourbon, four roses in water. Her body was long, her lips strawberry. She met him that night on the Lakeland ferry. Johnny was fine, like a make-believe hero, a boy from the street, a young Robert De Niro. He told himself she could never be true and said, I will never fall in love with you. Then the third character in the tragedy is Tommy. Tommy was spoiled and a green-eyed man. He knew Annabella might take his hand. So that sets the table, and it evolves like the Great Gatsby in three acts, and it ends with a terrible death. So Crazy Angels is the title of the album as well, and I grew up with these Crazy Angels, Crazy Angels, Ragged Saints in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, which I grew up in. You see the icons in the churches, and you see these faces, and they're just anguished, crazy, literally crazy faces, and that's what I grew up with. It's like growing up in a Caravaggio painting. If you know that Italian painter, these faces are just stunning. And I also grew up in the Jewish community in downtown Toronto at Kensington Market, and it's very similar. It's the same experience, and I connected very closely with that. I had many, many friends, and I knew the synagogues in Kensington Market. And the same, it's Crazy Angel. So I think maybe David and I connected on that level because we had our families and our personal experiences were similar.
Mhm. So if I can just quickly tack on to that, because, I grew up on the other side of the tracks, if you will. And what I mean by that, from the Rosedale Valley, number one, there was a subway going on the main route through Toronto called Yonge Street. So I was on the other side of the tracks of Rosedale Valley, so the wrong side. And then there's another set of tracks which is the Canadian National Railroad. And the street I grew up on, they built these crap houses basically just to house the people that were building the railroad and the infrastructure for the railroad in Toronto at the time. So they were just like really rough workers' houses, really not elegant. And the thing is, my house literally was right beside the train track. And so, when the trains would go by, literally our house would shake, and it was a very, working class, poor to mid-class neighborhood. And, there were halfway houses and stuff like that. I don't know if you have those in Europe, but it's where people who just get out of jail to reintegrate into society, they live in halfway houses. They're called halfway houses, and they're on parole and probation. Anyway, there are like 3 halfway houses, and we all knew where they were, and you should avoid those. And you would run by them, and we were scared of them. And so yeah, I'm just like, and I'm connecting from the other side, I suppose. So he was Pascal in the Greek neighborhood. This is the east of the Rosedale Valley, and I'm northwest of the so we really did come from similar backgrounds. Also me, Eastern European background, and plenty of the crazy angels always around me. Where do I begin? Anyway, so
they're funny though. Crazy angels are often funny, but that's
sure.
A silver lining.
Anyway, just wanted to tack on to that.
Cool. And the other epic from the same album, Summerside, is also has the theme of an iconic place in Toronto, right?
Yeah, it's set on the waterfront in Toronto. In the West End, there's this beautiful old park called Sunnyside Park, and it fell on hard times after World War II. But 100 years ago, it was the place to be. It was an elegant amusement park. And Palisades Pier was planned to be a magnificent pier like the Great Pier in Chicago, with shops and dance halls and jazz clubs, etc. And sure enough, up and down the beach, you had elegant clubs and restaurants, and the iconic Sunnyside Pavilion, which looks like an ancient Roman bath. So it was the place to be and had this glamour and grandeur. And then it fell into disrepair with the Great Recession, and then World War II came. And my family, with so many of the other poor, migrant families, would go there, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, because it was a place you could go. And I talk about the cleansing tide of Summerside, where you could wash away your sins, wash away all the sufferings and torments you'd have. And you had this sense of grandeur there as well. Now the city of Toronto has invested in the area and has brought it up again, so it's a nice place to walk and jog, and but it still has that mystique. So just the introductory lines here. Daddy was a millwright with a broken back. We ended up living by the railroad tracks. Mama found work in a textile mill, which is true. Well, my mother worked in a textile mill. She kept us whole and paid our bills. Stuck all summer in a blistering town, inhaling fumes we could not keep down, chasing nickels on suicide streets. We'd ride down to Summerside, revive down at Summerside, surviving through Summerside, the cleansing tide of Summerside. And then again, I met you that summer, my divine Kathleen, uptown angel, drama queen, shimmering like Venus, the Botticelli painting, shimmering like Venus on grateful waves, heartbreak angel of the lost arcade. You came gliding to Summerside, shining at Summerside. Were you hiding at Summerside in the endless beaches and the carnival rides, the Latin lovers and the cleansing tide of Summerside? I really felt behind those lyrics, obviously.
And I literally lived by the railroad tracks growing up. So this is, again, this is the idea of our, connecting over the commonalities. Like you could walk, and in 30 seconds, you could actually be on the railroad tracks. So yeah, there's a lot of commonalities here.
I think the fact that both of you grew up in the same city makes you two a perfect match, because you, David, you will be able to understand Pascal's lyrics precisely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's perfect.
So,
yeah.
And I think, just, quickly from the production side, like that, I think that is important, right? Now, it's not always important, like one of the greatest hip hop producers of all time, Rick Rubin, did not share a commonality. Well, in some ways, yes. In the sense that, he's Jewish and hip hop artists are Black, and Jews and Blacks typically were always kept on the outside of sort of mainstream, sort of acceptable culture, if you will, which, is obviously ridiculous to most reasonable people, but that's their commonality. But for example, that's kind of where it ends.
Yeah.
Pascal and I, we really connect literally. Like, we're only 10 years apart in age. But yeah, literally this bridge, I know it. We used to cause mischief all the time close to it, and, spray graffiti on it. And then, of course, the city of Toronto, as soon as you put graffiti anywhere in the city, within half an hour, there's a guy washing it off.
At least
so,
that
nobody even bothers doing graffiti in Toronto anymore. And then they just said, all right, listen, graffiti people, we're going to designate a few city blocks. You guys just go to town there. What do you say? Okay. And then there is, I think, along Bathurst, the Bloor,
wow.
there's a couple of blocks there that are dedicated for that. So yeah, no, but I think it helps. I mean, not every song, like most of Pascal's songs, don't specifically reference the city of Toronto, but when they do, like for me, it's always like, oh man, like Come to Your Window, Sarah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like literally talking about Spadina Street, which, in Toronto was like where all the immigrants were, and, Chinese and Jewish and Greek and Italian, like everybody was on Spadina Street. It was like this still is a big street that runs through Toronto. So, I get little goosebumps every time, because I live in Rome now, and I haven't lived in Toronto in 8 years. I haven't lived in that city. So
cool.
It's an iconic city. It's in a class with New York, Chicago, in terms of stories. But my sense is that we don't have enough stories, operas, epics about Toronto. So one of our
songs.
Toronto.
We have a song called Toronto.
It's one of our goals. One of our goals is to celebrate this magnificent city that we grew up in. Now, there are some poems about the Prince Edward Viaduct. There's a very good novel by Michael Ondaatje called In the Skin of a Lion about the building of the Prince Edward Viaduct. Just a bit more background. It is one of the most fatal standing structures in North America after the Golden Gate Bridge. So I guess the glamour, the magnificence, the heartbreak of it draws people that are very troubled. And, the suicides, unfortunately, are common as they are at the Golden Gate Bridge, probably for similar reasons. So there is this tragedy, this aura, this magnificence around it. And it was this metaphor that for me growing up, and for David in the ways he described, and it's the heart of the song. The bridge our fathers and their fathers built, and the second part of the song, the climax of the song. There's a lyric that I also felt very much behind. So Johnny knows that he can never have Annabella, and he's a fool to think she'll ever fall in love with him. But in the midnight glow, they were bathed in sweat, the city a dream, a moonlight silhouette, and gradually in her warm embrace, Johnny forgot the vow he made. And then there's this magnificent interlude, and I'm sure David will play part of it. I definitely wanted to explain the arrangement. It's heartbreaking. In a passion dark, he lost his heart. Above the street, in an embrace so sweet, hair like the sun coming undone, all around her face stinging with grace. Annabella would always haunt him, and soon would no longer want him, and the words he'd always feared he whispered into her ear, and she pretended not to hear. Johnny stole out to the bridge between the poor and the rich, and looking out on that strand, and the worlds it spanned, Johnny began to understand. A freighter was heading east, and it sounded like a wounded beast, and the cry rose and filled the dark, piercing poor Johnny's heart.
Beautiful.
That's
Well,
gorgeous.
you ought to hear what David did with it.
Wow.
Yes,
Come on, it's
please.
not
Well,
David.
what we did.
We gotta, yeah, we can't just give me this. I mean, this is the original Crazy Angels band, which, by the way, is Pascal. Obviously songwriter, vocalist, architect. You got me on basically drums, bass, and doing all the main arranging, for strings and horns. And Davide Sambrota, he's the magnificent. And then we have Marco Bonelli. He's the
And
sax player.
Luca.
He's not featured on these songs, but then Luca Camerota, he's the principal guitar player, and now we also have Giulio Rossatelli. So yeah,
Wonderful.
Yeah, all these great musicians, we're all involved in bringing these songs to life. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm the production architect, right? In terms of making sure that these songs are being, not songs, these epics, because I mean, Summerside is 9 minutes and 50, like it's almost 10 minutes, okay, and Crazy Angels is 7.5 minutes. So like these are really epic songs. So the musicians have to be credited. The musicians that I've mentioned.
Yeah, they're magnificent.
They're freaking amazing players. I was going to say, I don't know if I can say that on. They were freaking amazing, and they are freaking amazing, and we have to give the credit where it's due. And because without Davide Sambrota on the piano, like we wouldn't have the Summerside that we have, or Crazy Angels. Yeah.
The climactic scene in Crazy Angels, which I just read out, has the most marvelous string arrangement with Davide's really tasty piano, and it really is heartbreaking. That's how I imagined it when I was writing it, and I couldn't believe that David could bring what was in my mind to life so beautifully, so intuitively as well. He did the same with Summerside and the climactic parts of Summerside as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
And just to quickly add, to that, like Pascal and I had, so many conversations where he would explain what he's hearing in his head. And again, for like young aspiring producers, like that's one of your jobs, right? Get in the artist's head respect what's there. Don't try to change what's there. Bring to life what is, because artists are dreamers. They imagine everything, and from that imagination, you it's your job to build it. You have to build it. So they do the blueprints and they're the architect, and but you're the construction worker. I guess I'm the foreman and the band is. Just saying.
All right, you guys get to work. He lights another cigarette. Come on, God damn it!
Get back on those pianos. And then, of course, I'm also one of the construction workers on arrangements, bass and drums and other stuff. Being a drummer, that's my first instrument. But go on, Pascal. I interrupt.
The final part, the final movement, if I could say, of Crazy Angels begins, and the song ends as it begins with a twist, like a tattered rag, a defiant flag, blood red sun, rise, rays are spilt. So the full cycle. Over heartbreak alleys in the glistening valley, and the bridge our fathers and their fathers built, and it just starts again. It'll just keep going forever. This is a forever story. And nowadays, people are not coming so much from Eastern Europe. They're coming from South America, from Africa, from the Middle East, from East Asia. But it's the same story, in this sense of longing and wanting to create some kind of beauty and magic and foundation and sense of belonging. And it's not as easy as it sounds. And there are many, many different expressions of this story. This particular expression is a tragic one. There's a death, as there is in The Great Gatsby. In Summerside, there's a different kind of an ending. It's equally tragic in its own way, but it's a different expression. So this story ends in many different ways, which I think is why it's so fascinating and so eternal for people,
David, could we hear little audio examples of the songs we just talked about?
Yeah, sure. I guess we'll start with Crazy Angels, and I'll just play a few little snippets, I suppose.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, there we go. So, nice little introduction, and then we'll give this great lyric.
Like a tattered rag, a defiant flag, blood red sundown, a razor spilt over heartbreak alleys and a glistening valley, and the bridge our fathers and their fathers built, and the bridge our fathers and their fathers built. Crazy angels and ragged saints haunt these rooftops and fire escapes.
It's so hard to cut the song off at any one point, but we simply don't have 20 minutes. So executive decision making I'm doing. So this is kind of like the main, the guts of it. And in the production style, we discussed the idea of, Bruce Springsteen and, some of these classic American rockers and, just putting together, the Crazy Angels band, and this is really the song where the band does everything, so except for Marco, because there's no sax solo in here, but, we got Luca, Davide, myself, Pascal, and we're all filling out different parts, probably me more parts because I'm also doing strings and, horns and, obviously mixing and, a lot of the bass lines and obviously drums. Anyway, let's go to the next section.
Crazy angels and ragged saints haunt these rooftops and fire escapes. The cathedral's empty and the sisters are gone.